Giles. I'm a member of the Politics and the Pub Committee, and I'll be your chairperson for tonight's topic, which is, where is the ALP left and what does it stand for? The timing is amazing. This keeps on happening for us in Politics and the Pub. The topic seems to coincide with some major public event. It's happened again because it comes in the same week as the celebration of Gough Whitlam's courageous life, of magnificent achievements, of progressive reforms that, as we all know, transformed Australia and is now under vicious attack by the Abbott government. Now, we chose the topic on the ALP left because although there's been much media coverage for a few months about the needed reform of the ALP, there's been really insufficient, detailed, informed public opinion about the internal structures of the ALP that determine how its policy is formulated and how state and federal members and the leaders of parliaments are chosen. Now, I think we all know that there are two main factions, right and left, and they have a key role both in the structure of the ALP and its functioning. Now, as we are quite obviously a left progressive organisation, we've chosen two excellent speakers from the left, John Graham and Stephen Jones. And the first speaker will be John Graham. And what John has given me to read out to you, for those of you who don't know John Graham has been the left-wing Assistant General Secretary of the New South Wales Labor Party since 2010. Prior to that, he has worked as an advisor to state Labor governments in New South Wales, Queensland, including as Deputy Chief of Staff to Premier Nathan Rees. So I'm going to call to the lectern, John.
Thanks, Win, and very happy to be here. As the left-wing Assistant Secretary of the Labor Party, it's only rarely that I speak publicly about the operations of the left wing of the Labor Party. We've got plenty of left-wing MPs who play a lot of that public role, and in general I take the view that's been attributed to Whitlam that the best machine is a silent machine. But I was very happy to take up this opportunity, in part because of the question, to tackle directly the question of where the left is now, some of its history, some of its people, and what are the issues that we're really fighting for at the moment. It is an important question, but it's also an important forum. I really remember as a young activist, having grown up outside of Sydney and outside of politics, coming to Politics in the Pub on a Friday night, having a drink and really having a chance to take part in some passionate discussions and debate about ideas. So I was very happy to accept Win's invitation, and I really want to pay tribute to Win and the rest of the committee who've kept this institution going and renewing itself week after week as a forum to debate those progressive ideas. I think it's absolutely something that Sydney needs more of. And I can only say this as we begin. I hope over the years the questions have got a little bit easier. Now, the New South Wales Left will meet on Friday week to celebrate its 60th anniversary, and appropriately that occasion will happen in a Chinese restaurant. I think it's useful tonight to be able to describe some of those early beginnings. There were left-wing movements in the Labor Party prior to that period, but it was only in late 1954 and 1955 that the forerunner to the New South Wales Left in the Labor Party came into being. And that was the Combined Unions and Branches Steering Committee. It began the structural resistance to the power of the right wing of the New South Wales Labor Party that continues today. Above all, what its formation crystallised, was the growing unease at the increasing influence of the movement inside the Labor Party. And that is the Catholic social studies movement led by Bob Santamaria. The flashpoint In early October, exactly 60 years ago, was the confronting speech given by federal leader Doc Evatt, which denounced the movement and its actions. And forces in the Labor Party quickly resolved at that point into pro and anti-Evatt forces around the country. It's true that there had been some early organisation for the committee beforehand, and it had two characteristics. One was the very early meetings were almost secret cell-like meetings, some of the early ones of which apparently happened in the Esperanto rooms in the northern pillar of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. But secondly, that it was a very broad, it was actually quite a broad political grouping. So it included unions such as the Australian Workers' Union and the Transport Workers' Union, that today would be really associated as the mainstays of the right wing of the Labor Party. So that was the early beginnings, but for me the progress of the left in the Labor Party since that time can be really told in the story of three moments of crisis, each of which have led to federal intervention into the New South Wales branch of the Labor Party. The first of those was in the mid-1950s and followed hot on the heels of that early agitation by the steering committee. That intervention was an early win that removed key right-wing members of the New South Wales ALP executive, but really left the right firmly in charge over the decades that followed. Later observers will be unsurprised to hear that one of the key complaints was a party conference ballot that had been rorted by the right underneath the Sydney Town Hall with a dodgy how to vote. The second of those interventions was in 1971. It was a time when middle-class activists were joining the Labor Party, and as the party was grappling to get its party apparatus into a modern form, capable of actually representing the party broadly, but also winning government. And that intervention created the role that I now serve in at the ALP office, the left-wing assistant secretary, whose previous occupants include someone who's here tonight, the first of those assistant secretaries, someone who's still a real guide and an inspiration, Bruce Childs. I think he'd make good comments on that. But also John Faulkner, Anthony Albanese, Damien O'Connor and Luke Foley. The third of those interventions was just last year, led by Kevin Rudd as he returned to the Prime Ministership, and it concluded literally days before the federal election campaign began. And I believe it's laid the conditions which may allow a more democratic future for the Labor Party, but I'll come back to that point towards the end. So at each of those stages, the left has become more involved in the power structures of the Labor Party, although I can still report that the culture of total control, which has perpetuated the New South Wales right and the New South Wales Labor Party, remains firmly in place. Wynne has asked me to outline who are some of the left-wingers.
And the different areas, you know?
Yeah, across some of the areas. So I'm happy to do that, although it is at the risk of leaving many good people out.
Sure.
So with that caveat. But in the current federal parliament, you know, some of the leading performers, some of the well-known names, Deputy Tanya Plibersek, Anthony Albanese and Mark Butler are some of the key left-wing members of the House of Reps. In the Senate, the Leader of the Senate, Penny Wong, and John Faulkner are prominent members of the left. I also want to mention and pay tribute to some federal members from New South Wales. People like Stephen Jones and Doug Cameron have been strong progressive voices on issues and are now in the shadow cabinet. In State Parliament, former Premier Nathan Rees, former Deputy Premier Carmel Tebbit, current Deputy Leader Linda Burney and Upper House Leader Luke Foley, along with prominent members like Penny Sharp and Verity Firth, are all obviously left-wing MPs. In the movement more broadly, It's really union leaders like Sally McManus, who's left Stephen and I on our own tonight, undefended. Tim Ayres and Mark Boyd in New South Wales. Senior ACTU figures like Dave Oliver and Jed Carney. And nationally, people like Linda White, Nadine Flood, Michael O'Connor, Paul Bastian and David Byrne are all left-aligned key union leaders. So that's a little bit of a sense of who's there across the field, many of which are people who'd be well known to you. One of the real changes that's been taking place, though, is that increasingly the left has ended up taking on a leadership role in the Labor Party in very recent years. And Nathan Rees is not an isolated example in that sense. In recent years, we've had Anna Bligh in Queensland, Jay Weatherill in South Australia, Daniel Andrews, who may well be the Premier of Victoria at the end of this month, Lara Giddings and now Brian Greene in Tasmania, Katie Gallagher in the ACT, and Julia Gillard, who was very nearly followed by Anthony Albanese as the federal leader. Each of those examples is a product of their own particular circumstances, but collectively, I think it is a real indication that Labor is changing. And then finally, what I'd like to give you a bit of a sense of is some of the key issues that we're fighting on at the moment. Each of these issues is going to come to a head as we contest Labor's platform at our national conference next July in Melbourne. So a quick sketch of some of the key issues there. On marriage equality, which was the subject of a key debate at the last national conference, the left won't accept that letting people who love each other marry should be the subject of a conscience vote, normally resolved for matters of life and death. It's simply a matter of equality, and it should be binding Labor policy as a result. And that's the position I expect we'll take to the conference. On tax and small government, there'll be a key dispute. And on that position, the left will not accept a small government agenda. What we've seen is an attempt to have an artificial cap on the amount of tax to GDP as a ratio for an incoming federal Labor government. Winning this debate at national conference is crucial to everything else that Labor might want to do as part of a bold, progressive Labor agenda. So it really is a crucial debate. On refugees, we'll continue the search for a moral settlement to this issue. And it's been elusive so far. It's been a terrible period. We'll talk some more about that later, I'm sure. But it'll be a key conference debate. And on democracy, the fight will continue to produce a Labor Party capable of reaching out and actually engaging with people. That has been the case in our all-member leadership ballot and also in our community pre-selection trials, actually allowing community members to join in to vote to select Labor's candidates. Just one example, a local one, 10% of the electorate of Balmain recently voted in Labor's process to select Labor's candidate for the state seat of Balmain. I think that's a real clue to Labor's future reaching out to its supporters. So I do believe that the 2013 interventions have laid the basis for a more democratic future for Labor. There's a lot of hard work to go, but two things have meant that this is now, for the first time in that 60 years, a fair fight. And those two changes were this. One, a genuinely democratic leadership election to determine the leadership of the Labor Party at a parliamentary level, federal and state. And that now means that a whole lot of debates and a whole lot of political issues are now on the table. And secondly, one of the very specific things that Kevin Rudd introduced in the 2013 intervention, fair party tribunals. And if you want a practical example of what that means, well, Kevin Rudd took Joe Tripodi off Labor's tribunals and brought the lawyers in. And I'm pretty sure that's going to produce a better result when it comes to having fair internal processes. So those two things by themselves are not enough, but I do believe they've now laid the conditions for progressives inside and outside the Labor Party to actually help transform Labor. Finally, I've talked about the left coming forward into some of those leadership positions. However, we've always been at our best, and I've learnt this lesson from Bruce more than anyone else. We've always been at our best when we've had a broad movement campaigning for change, but also some MPs who played the role, like someone like a Stephen Jones or a Doug Cameron have in recent years, outspoken MPs on issues that matter to Labor's progressive voice. And it's in a long tradition. It's in the tradition of Tom Uren, of Arthur Geetseld, of Bruce Childs. It's an important tradition. And I will talk very specifically about the example Wynne referred to of Stephen taking up the fight for marriage equality and moving the legislation for marriage equality. It wasn't especially popular in his electorate. It was used by his right-wing opponents in his electorate to try and knock him over in his pre-selection. But regardless of that, he took on that fight, advanced the issue, and is here today as the federal member, having stood up proudly on an issue that I think is very important for Labor's future. And I think that's a real example to others. I do spend a lot of my time in this role telling MPs that yes, it's true you have to vote together in Parliament, but you don't have to agree in public all the time with each other. I really believe that makes us stronger as a movement when we have people who played the role that someone like Stephen has. And I do want to call tonight, as Stephen and Doug have gone into the shadow cabinet, for some of those new progressive MPs to play the role that they have played, stand up, argue the case, not just in the caucus as they are now, but in public as well, so that they can connect with Labor's progressive base on those issues. And Labor will be all the stronger for it. So the left has really moved from those secret cell beginnings over in the North Pylon of the Harbour Bridge to being a very different organisation now. We're much more open, we're much more public about our role in the Labor Party. We are out there on the internet and social media as politics is changing. That's just the way politics works now. Talking about the core values that left-wingers represent in the Labor Party: social justice, equality and democracy. But I don't think anyone who saw the events yesterday and has been reflecting on the life and the impact of Gough Whitlam could not believe that they shouldn't just be the views of the left wing of the Labor Party. That's really the sort of Labor Party and the sort of community that we all want to see.
Yeah.